All right, guys, welcome to our new unit. We are done talking about colonial life and now we're moving forward. Our next unit is titled Rising Tensions, and from here on out, we're going to be talking about everything that directly leads up to the American Revolution. So let's get this thing started. When the colonies first got started, the whole reason why England even created the colonies, they relied on England for everything, meaning that England had a lot of control over them. This flag up here in the top right, by the way, is the original flag for the colonies. That pine tree was usually used for them because what the colonies are used for are those raw materials. And England's going to benefit a lot from them because they're getting a lot of raw materials, which they're going to be able to turn to finished products, which they use to make a lot of money, like an insane amount of money. Tensions start rising between Mother England and her colonial children, which is kind of how England thought of the colonies. It's like, we're the mom, they're the kids, like they don't know what's best for them, we're going to do everything. But that kind of thinking is going to be part of what leads to the American Revolution. Now, there are a few things we've already talked about in this last unit that are going to lead to this, like apprenticeship. The king did not like apprenticeship because it made the colonies depend less on England and limited mercantilism, which we talked about before. Mercantilism is that idea that the more stuff and the more money you have, the more power you have over other countries, and the colonies were used as like a money-making, power-making machine. So if the colonies don't need England anymore, then that machine is broken and England's not going to be making money. England also allowed the colonies to have limited self-government without interference. A good example of that would be the House of Burgesses. And then this is something new. England is going to pass what's called the Navigation Acts. This made it so that the colonies could only trade from England. So England could literally jack up the price to whatever they wanted, and the colonies would have to pay it because they were not allowed legally to buy from anybody else. And so this is an example or a bunch of different examples of how this is going to affect the colonies. So for instance, if you were a milliner, you have a lot of hats and stuff and you're ready to sell them to England, England wouldn't buy them from you because they're like, no, we got plenty of people who make that in England, make something else. And you were not allowed to export anything except on an English ship or a colonial ship. So if there was a French ship in the harbor sailing in the direction of the place where you want to sell your stuff, you could not put your stuff on that ship. You would have to wait for an English or colonial ship to be able to send it. You were supposed to send all that tobacco to England. It had to, anything that you picked up in other countries, you had to bring to England first and pay a tax, and then you could bring it to the colonies. So that added a ton of time to your trip, which meant you were wasting a lot of resources when you could sail just straight to the colonies. Mercantilism changes the way England looks at the colonies. England's going to increase trade regulations so that the colonies pretty much are working for the motherland instead of being like on equal footing. And if that doesn't work, if you're not making enough money that way, then you pick a country to go to war with who's an economic rival of yours and get the colonies to fight as well. And that's exactly what's going to happen. There's going to be a bunch of different conflicts between England and France, because France at this point is the only other country that's kind of a rival for England. Spain still has not recovered from the last time England kicked their butt. And so all of those eventually spill over into North America. There's King William's War, there's Queen Anne's War, King George's War. So they've been like picking at each other since 1689, and we're looking at the 1740s right now. These wars are based on mercantilism and economic competition, and have very little like political significance. Like there's not a ton of land that changes hands. It's literally just, can I make this other country spend more money on the war than I am? And whoever spends the least amount of money is the winner. But that's going to change because after a while people start grabbing up land in the 1750s, but the French and the British colonists are both arguing they cannot agree who owns what land. And if you look at this map, you see all that kind of pinkish area. That's the land France has claimed. The blue is England. The yellowy color is England. And purple means that it's like disputed between British and French. So you see where those lines, that means that land's being argued over by those two different countries. So there's a lot of land that Britain and France cannot agree about who owns what. And these territorial disputes are going to spark what's known as the French and Indian War. This is a war between France and England for control over the Ohio River Valley, and I'll show you maps where that is. It's also known as the 7 Years' War, even though technically it lasts for 9 years. This whole war is pretty ridiculous, so we're going to try to make as much sense of it as we can. Between 1754 and 1763, English soldiers from both the American colonies and England are going to fight with France in the colonial territories. The Native Americans are going to be given the choice between fighting with the French against the English or with the English against the French. And I'm going to show you like the pros and cons for each side, and if you were Native American, which side are you going to pick? If you go with England and the English colonies, they want to use your land for fur trading and farming, meaning that they're going to be digging up a lot of your land, and they are going to want to expand and take more and more. They consider you to be savages, meaning that you are like an animal pretending to be a person, and they want to keep expanding their territory even further to the west, and they have a really fast growing population in the colonies, and it doesn't seem like it's going to slow down anytime soon. So that's England now, or you could go with the French. They just want to use your land for fur trading. They don't need to chop any trees down, do anything for that. They've married into the Native American tribes and raised families with them in America. A lot of missionaries are living in the West that try to convert Native Americans to Christianity, which most Native Americans weren't super thrilled about. They could care less, but they're not doing it in like a join or die kind of way. And they have a pretty small population in America. So between those two, most Native Americans are going to go with the French. So the two sides of this war are the French and the Indians versus England and the colonies. Now, those of you who are in the classroom, you're probably going to have a chart that matches up with this, so you need to glue this into your notebook now and copy this down. If you are not in the classroom or if you're quarantined or whatever's going on, make sure you go ahead and just sketch out this chart really quickly and copy this down as well. So the causes of the French-Indian War, for the Native Americans, it's the fact that they're upset that the English colonists are settling on their land. This is land that they've signed treaties with England over, like, hey, this is ours, you guys can't live here, we agreed on this already. For the French, it's this conflict between England and France over territory in the West, and for England, it's their desire to expand and keep expanding west. They don't want to stop anytime soon. The Native Americans live on this land, and they've been fighting to maintain control over this land and their future, and they want to be able to trade with the Europeans. They just don't want the Europeans to live here and to keep pushing them out of their territory. They've been living here for hundreds of years. It's their land. The French want to be able to control the rivers. There's the fur trade with Native Americans that they are really big on, and they want to be able to keep doing that. And the more land that they're able to kind of hunt in, the better. And so that's why they're fighting. Britain also is claiming this land because they want to farm. And there are all these people who want to sell that land to the farmers and make money off of that. And then there are people who want to trade with the Native Americans and get that land, but they need to have that land to have access to the Native Americans, because a lot of them have moved out of the areas where the British are and have moved a little bit further west up into the Appalachian Mountains or even onto the other side of those mountains. So let's talk about the Ohio River Valley and why this is going to spark so much chaos. All right, so this guy down here in the bottom right, his name is Governor Dinwiddie, and he absolutely deserves the name. He is governor of Virginia, which is nowhere near Ohio, okay? He does not own Ohio. The British do not own Ohio. That is French territory. However, he is going to give a land grant to what becomes known as the Ohio Company to sell that land. And the French and the Native Americans just kind of go, well, hold on. One, you guys don't even own that. And two, even if you did, Governor Dinwiddie doesn't have the power to just give that away. But the governor was like, yeah, sure, I can. And so he just gave that big old chunk. You see the area on the map that's kind of darker green? That's the Ohio River Valley. He just gave all that away to somebody else. And the French were like, no. So the Ohio Company realizes what kind of a mess that they've stepped into, and they ask the French to recognize their land claim. And weirdly enough, France goes, no. The person that the Ohio Company, they ask for a volunteer. They don't just order somebody, but they ask for a volunteer, like, who wants to go tell the French and say, hey, I know we, like, kind of stole your land. Will you pretty please just let us have it? And we're not going to pay you for it. And the person who volunteers to go is this little young officer named George Washington. This is the same George Washington who will eventually become president, but right now he's very British and in the British Army, and he volunteers to go deliver this message, and it is kind of insane. He and this one other guy hire this Native American to be their guide because they don't really know where they're going. They're just kind of hiking off into the wilderness and trying to find this French fort to deliver this letter from Governor Dinwiddie. And they get to there and the French say absolutely not and send them away, which they kind of figured was going to happen, but they had to deliver it. On the way back is when things get insane. George Washington and his friend wake up one night and their guide has ditched them in the middle of the woods. And they're looking around trying to find him, and all of a sudden this gunshot rings out and like the tree behind George Washington's head like gets hit with a bullet, and they realize that the guide has been paid by the French to kill George Washington and his friend before they get back to the British territory. So over the course of the next 3 days, this one Native American guide is hunting George Washington and his friend. They get back to this river they had crossed to get to the French fort, but that river had been frozen before and they could just walk over it. But now that ice is broken up and it is very cold and very fast. So they have to very quickly, while looking around for that guide to see if he's tracked them down again, have to build this tiny little raft and try to make it to the other side of the river without hitting any ice or rocks or anything like that. One big chunk of ice does hit the raft so hard that it knocks George Washington off the raft, and he almost drowns. His friend almost doesn't save his life and pull him back onto the raft. That was kind of insane 3 days, but George Washington does make it back, and I can just imagine him stumbling into Governor Dinwiddie's office, soaking wet and freezing, and just saying, yeah, they said no. So there are lots of advantages and for both sides, and again, you need to copy this chart down. For England, they have more colonies, and which means that they have more people already living over here that can kind of start the fight. Meanwhile, France is going to have to send people over here. There are lots of militias that each colony has set up to defend itself. It's like the National Guard for that colony. The colonies are all very self-supporting. There's apprenticeships and homespun stuff. So like there are people who know how to make their own stuff over here. For France, on the other hand, though, they only have to deal with one government telling the army what to do and not 13 different governments arguing over what to do next. They already have forts built along all of the rivers pretty much. And they're going to get help from most of the Native Americans. Some of the colonists start calling for unity, though. They don't think that this is good enough. They want to create like some kind of unified government because one of their biggest disadvantages is that there's 13 of them all arguing over what to do. But if there's just one government that can make them all do the same thing and work together, then that would be great. And one plan gets put forward called the Albany Plan. It was written by Benjamin Franklin. In this plan, it calls for the colonies to unite and form one government to fight off the French. And every single colony said, absolutely not. The reason why they say no is because they want to be in control. They like being in charge of themselves and they don't want to give up that power. They're scared if like they create a central government that it's going to take away this power that they like have. Because in England, like most people don't have the same opportunities and the same power that they have. And so they're kind of scared, but like we really like this and we don't want to lose it. So your plan's awesome, but we're going to say no. Go ahead and copy this down because we're going to look at a political cartoon. A political cartoon we looked at whenever we talked about primary sources, but it is something that has to do with like a current event of the day, and it's an artist's interpretation of that event or their opinion on it, because Benjamin Franklin's going to take the rejection of his plan very calmly and very civilly. I'm lying, he does not. He creates this political cartoon right here, which you've probably seen before in civics. This is titled Join or Die. You have the different sections of the snake here with different initials next to them. when he says join or die, he means like if we don't all work together and form one government, then we are going to get killed by the French. The reason why the snake is chopped up into little pieces is because if that was all one whole snake and it was alive, it would be a lot more dangerous. But since it's chopped up into bits, it's very dead and not very threatening. And all the different initials next to it are the names of different colonies. So he's saying so long as the colonies are separated and not working together, we're not going to be much of a match against the French, and they're going to kill us like this dead snake here. But if we were all one, then we'd actually be something to reckon with. This is not actually the original version of this political cartoon. This is the original. It was written in the Boston Journal, which was the name of the newspaper at the time, that he printed this in. So, Washington and the Jumonville incident, I'll include a link to this that kind of explains everything that went down here, but this is going to be one of like the inciting incidents between French and the British, because they have these little like tiny skirmishes where they're like kind of testing each other, like, oh, what are you going to do if I like go over here into your territory, or what are you going to do if like I go over here? And so they're kind of testing each other. And so I'll include the link below to the video, so make sure you watch it because it's very interesting and very cool. But after that, after the whole thing that goes down with Jumonville, Washington runs off into Ohio to protect the English colonies from the French, and he builds this fort called Fort Necessity because he had to build this fort. This attack is going to be led by the 22-year-old colonel now, George Washington, and it is not successful. So to give you an idea of why this is not going to work very well, here's what the fort looks like. It was put together very quickly. He did not pick a great place for it to be built. He picked a meadow. Now the difference between just an open field and a meadow is usually in a low-lying area. And anytime it rains or anything like that, all that water is going to pool down into this area. So the ground here is very wet and very muddy. It's actually too muddy for anything taller than a bush to grow. So that's why there are no trees. And so trying to build this wall, like the different planks they were using, kept falling over. It's extremely small. The walls are only going to be 7 feet high. And that little hut is like, you know, just barely big enough to put their food and their ammo and everything else like that inside of. So this was already not looking like such a great thing. And then around the outside, you can kind of see it in the right side of the picture, he dug these trenches because that's what you do. It provides extra cover. There aren't any trees to like have cover behind a fire from, and trenches would slow down any army that's coming to, you know, invade you. Washington picked this spot, even though it doesn't defend anything important or strategic, is because it's open and there's water and pasture and it's protected by 2 streams. But like we said, the ground here is also very wet because it's very low level and it's extremely small. He started with 160 men and ended up with 400 when another group of British soldiers retreated to his location. So there is no room actually inside the fort for all of these soldiers. And I'll include another link to this video showing you what goes down at this battle. But after they clashed with the French at Fort Duquesne, that was the battle that he ran back to Fort Necessity, being chased by the French and Native Americans. Food is already very low. There's extremely heavy rain. There's almost no shelter. And after it started raining, because they're at such a low level and they're already in a place that's very muddy, all those trenches that he dug started filling up with water. And the trees were just close enough for the French to hang back and snipe at the defenders. And once the gunpowder got wet, none of the British soldiers' guns were going to fire. So Washington had to surrender. And the French eventually just kind of kick over the fort and leave it because there's no point in keeping this here. Washington resigns from the army. Everybody blames him for the loss. And everybody, like, they're almost like making fun of him. It was like, this stupid idiot thought that this was going to work. This was an awful plan. But Washington is the kind of person, like, he wants to be in the military. It's what he wants to do. But the reason why he made it to colonel at such a young age was because his dad is super rich. And he realizes now, like, I should not have been in charge. I'm not experienced enough. I don't know enough about this to make good decisions here. So I still want to be in the military, but I'm going to quit and then return as a volunteer. That way they can't just promote me all the way up to an officer just because of who my dad is. I'll have to earn my way up just like everybody else, because he still wants to do this, but he doesn't want to do it just because it's been given to him. A few other battles, like Fort Duquesne, the British are trying to kick the French out of their forts and clear the way for a British invasion into French territory. And again, Governor Dinwiddie, back again, had his guys build this place called Fort Prince George. And then the French come in and kick over the fort and build a much bigger and more impressive fort on top of the old place. So there are many attempts to take Fort Duquesne. The first attempt is led by General Braddock, which was not very successful. Washington was actually at this battle too. He was one of Braddock's aides. Braddock is going to get killed in the attack, and we'll talk about why that's going to be really scary for the colonists in the 13 colonies during this time. Even though the French win the first attempt, they know that they could not survive a second attack. They don't have enough men. They don't have enough supplies to last through another attack. But they don't want to leave this giant fort for them to have, so they dismantle the entire fort and then leave. And as the British are marching towards the fort expecting this big fight, the French and the Native Americans have left a little bit of a present for them at the fort. All of the prisoners that they had taken, they have killed, and then cut off their heads and put them on stakes and surrounded the place where the fort used to be. So that was the site the British came upon when they went back to Fort Duquesne after it had been dismantled. This is going to be when war is officially declared. So all these other little battles, Fort Duquesne, Fort Necessity, all that stuff, does not happen. Like, war is not officially declared. So all that stuff, that was just like a precursor. It's not technically a war. We're just fighting with each other. The colonists are really frustrated with Britain. British attacks keep ending in defeat over and over and over and over and over again. They're afraid of the French and their native allies. They don't feel like the British are like super motivated to protect the North American colonies. And so they kind of feel like they're on their own out here. Anytime there's trouble, all they really have is their militia. They have to wait for the British Army to show up, and there's not enough soldiers over here to protect all 13 colonies. That's a lot of territory to cover. French and Native American attacks tend to be really brutal. They would burn down settlements and just tear everything to the ground. The closest one of these attacks was actually just 60 miles away from Philadelphia, which is not that far and deep inside British territory. So the colonists kind of feel like the British like either can't or don't care enough to protect them, and they have to do something themselves. Especially after General Braddock is killed, because he was like considered to be like the guy who was going to protect them. And after he's dead, well, who's really left? In England, we get a new prime minister. His name is William Pitt, and he is sick and tired of seeing the direction the war is going. Because remember, the whole point of starting this war was to get territory and to get France to spend a lot of money on the war. Because again, they have this mindset of whatever country spends the most money is going to be the loser. But William Pitt decides, like, this is going on for way too long. And so when he becomes prime minister, it's actually the turning point of the war. He decides we're going to kick France out no matter how much money it costs. And so after Pitt takes over, he's going to send even more troops. He's going to replace all the old leaders who have old-fashioned ideas about how war should be fought with young ones who have new ideas. And he gives control of recruitment and supplies to local authorities in the colonies. So they do not have to wait for Britain to send over supplies. They can just do it themselves now. And that's going to cut down the time. A few battles that happen after this is in Acadia, which is now a place called Nova Scotia. It's up in Canada. Acadia has bounced back and forth between Britain and French, but Acadians are mostly French, and so anytime the British take over and the British are like, okay, you're part of us now, so you have to like swear allegiance to our country, and they're like, yeah, but the French are just going to take us back in a little bit, so we're going to pass on that. When the British finally like take over Acadia for good, the Acadians still refuse to swear allegiance, and so Britain is going to kick them all out because they don't want to leave a huge group of people that are not loyal to them all together in one place. So they decide to kick them out and banish them to the lower colonies. Now, this is quite a few people. It's about 6,000 to 7,000 people. It's known as the Great Expulsion, and they just rounded everybody out and said, grab what you can carry and start walking, get out. Some of them do escape this expulsion. They run off and escape deep into the wilderness, and they kind of act like almost like a Robin Hood gang, where they're raiding British troops and just being a general nuisance. Like, they're not going to like defeat them in any way, but they're using a tactic called guerrilla warfare, and we'll talk about that later. Another battle is in Louisburg. The British take the city of Louisburg, which is at the mouth of this huge river that leads from the Gulf of St. Lawrence down into French territory. And since they're able to block that river, all the trade and all the supplies that are being brought over from France to the French soldiers over here are going to be blocked. And so now, with the British colonies providing supplies for the British soldiers, the French are going to be the ones at a disadvantage here because they don't have enough food or supplies. A couple more battles. These are going to be the final battle. So this war, Quebec and Montreal. This is going to be the final blow for the French. The British commander named James Wolfe sent his forces up onto this huge rocky hill to try to surprise the French. And in the battles that follow, on this place called the Plains of Abraham, both Wolfe, who's the British commander, and the guy over on the French side, the French commander, are both killed almost at the same time. And so when the leader is killed, there tends to be a lot of confusion. Like, okay, that guy's dead. Who do I listen to now? Who's in charge? I don't know. Like, this guy's telling me to do one thing. This guy's telling me to do a different thing. Which one do I listen to? But the British, like, get it together a lot faster than the French do. And they get control over this territory. These were two of the biggest cities in the French territory at the time. And every battle after this, like these are the last two major battles. Every smaller battle after this ends in defeat for the French. And ultimately, the British get control over all of the territories that they had been arguing over with the French. And this is going to be the last time the French really have any kind of power in North America for the rest of history. Some of the effects of this war, England is going to win and gets a lot of territory due to what's known as the Treaty of Paris. This is the treaty that ends the French and Indian War. So here's the territory before the French and Indian War. Blue is France, red is Britain, green is Spain. The areas that have kind of like stripy lines is the area that they were arguing over. So this is before the war, and this is after. As you can see, Spain got a lot of territory, Britain's going to get a lot of territory, and France is completely gone now. Spain kind of hops into the Treaty of Paris like, hey, we're also over here, and we don't think it's fair if Britain gets all this territory. That's not going to be, we're not okay with that. And so they strike a deal, and Spain gets everything to the west of the Mississippi River. Britain gets Canada and everything to the east of the Mississippi River, and then Spain will also throw in Florida as just like a bonus. Because the natives are angry that England won the war, and because it costs a lot of money to defend that much territory, Britain just is not prepared for it. They decide to try to appease everybody and pass what's known as the Proclamation of 1763, which means that nobody is allowed to move west of the Appalachian Mountains. So even though they have all that orange territory over there, nobody is allowed to move over there. They have to stay where they've been this entire time, which the colonists are not super thrilled about, because wasn't the whole point of this war is to get that land, and now you're telling me we can't live there? We can't use this land that we fought and died for you to get? And the king knows that people aren't going to want to listen to this, so he is going to send 10,000 soldiers to enforce the Proclamation of 1763. England has to try to find a way to pay off all this war debt, because William Pitt said, we're going to win this war no matter how much money it costs. Well, now that's coming back to bite them, because now they owe a lot of people a lot of money. And so they figure, since this whole war was fought because of the colonists and for them, we'll make them pay extra, because that seems only fair. We'll talk about whether or not the colonists agree with that next time. But again, this is going to be the end of France's power in North America. The way the colonies see things after the war is that they realize, hey, when we work together, like, we get stuff done, like, it's not too bad. And there's all this land over here that, like, there's all these new opportunities now, there's wealth, there's land, and we actually kind of know how to fight now, so that's pretty fun. But the English, the way they saw it is like the colonies are unorganized, they're slow to work together, they don't like each other, they don't want to help out for the common good. If it doesn't help them, they don't want to deal with it. They don't even want to help raise money to protect their own land. And so they don't have a very positive view of the colonies. And that's going to come back to bite them, because as far as they're concerned, like, if we do something that the colonies don't like, they're not going to be able to work together to do anything about it. But the colonies have realized now, when we do work together, we can do really powerful stuff. And we'll talk about what that looks like next time I see you guys.